December 8th, 1980, New York City, 10:50 p.m. John Lennon stepped out of a limousine outside the Dakota, the Gothic apartment building on the Upper West Side where he had lived for years with Yoko Ono and their son, Sean. He had just come from a recording session. He was carrying tapes. He was thinking about music. A voice called his name from the shadows. 5 shots. 4 of them hit. John Lennon was pronounced dead at Roosevelt Hospital at 11:07 p.m. He was 40 years old. He had been back in music for the first time in 5 years. His new album had just been released. He had told an interviewer that week that he felt, for the first time in a long time, genuinely happy. The man who fired those shots was Mark David Chapman, 25 years old, from Honolulu, Hawaii. After the shooting, he sat down on the pavement outside the Dakota. He did not run. He did not panic. He opened a copy of The Catcher in the Rye and began to read, and waited calmly for the police to arrive. The official verdict was delivered quickly. Deranged fan. Obsession. Tragedy. Case closed. But there are things about Mark David Chapman that the official narrative has never fully explained. Things that individually might mean nothing. Together, they form a picture that certain people in certain government agencies have spent 40 years hoping nobody would examine too closely. Chapman had worked for the YMCA's International Resettlement Program, an organization that, during the 1970s, was documented as having CIA connections in its overseas operations. He had traveled extensively across Asia and the Middle East on a salary that his employment history cannot fully account for. In the months before the shooting, he had traveled from Hawaii to Atlanta, then to Chicago, then to New York. Multiple trips, expensive hotels, with no clear source of funding. His copy of The Catcher in the Rye, the book he was reading when the police arrived, contained a handwritten inscription. "This is my statement." The book was also the novel that, in documented CIA psychological research from the same era, had been used as a conditioning text in certain experimental programs. Multiple political assassins and attempted assassins from the 1960s and 70s were found to have connections to the same book. None of this is proof of anything. That must be stated clearly. What it is a series of questions that have never been officially answered. And then there is the question of why the United States government spent years treating John Lennon, a musician, as a national security threat. It began in 1971. John Lennon had moved to New York and immediately immersed himself in the anti-war movement. He performed at rallies. He funded activist organizations. He wrote songs that became anthems for a generation, demanding that the government end the Vietnam War. And he announced publicly that he planned to tour America in 1972, an election year, specifically to register young voters and campaign against Richard Nixon. Nixon's team received this information and treated it as a political emergency. The FBI was instructed to build a case for deporting Lennon, using a 1968 drug conviction in England as the legal basis. For 4 years, John Lennon lived under the constant threat of being expelled from the country he had made his home. His phone was tapped. Agents attended his concerts and filed reports. His immigration hearings were manipulated to extend the uncertainty as long as possible. Senator Strom Thurmond sent a private memo to Attorney General John Mitchell recommending that Lennon be removed from the United States as a matter of, and this is his exact phrasing, national security. That memo was classified. It was only released under the Freedom of Information Act decades later. John Lennon won his immigration battle in 1976. He was granted permanent residency. Nixon was gone, disgraced by Watergate, forced to resign. The immediate threat seemed to have passed. Lennon largely withdrew from public life. He became a house husband. He raised his son. He baked bread and watched television and stayed away from the world that had tried to destroy him. And then, in 1980, he came back. Double Fantasy, his new album with Yoko Ono, was released on November 17, 1980. It was warm, personal, political only in the sense that a man choosing peace and love over anger is always political. He gave interviews for the first time in years. He talked about his son. He talked about the future. 3 weeks later, he was dead. The FBI's file on John Lennon, 2,800 pages, was obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests filed by Professor John Wiener over a legal battle that lasted more than 20 years. The FBI fought the release. They claimed national security exemptions. They redacted entire sections. When the documents were finally released, Wiener described them as revealing a government in a state of near panic over the influence of a single musician. Certain sections of that file remain classified to this day. Mark David Chapman was denied parole 12 consecutive times. At each hearing, he has described his motive as a desire for fame and notoriety. The explanation is consistent. The explanation has satisfied the parole board 12 times, and 12 times they have denied him release anyway. He remains in Wendy Correctional Facility in New York. He is 69 years old. What he knew about his own movements in the months before December 8, 1980, how he funded those travels, who, if anyone, he spoke to in those final weeks, these questions have never been asked of him in a public forum. His lawyers have ensured that. John Lennon once said, in an interview that was, like so many things about him, more honest than the world was ready for, "The most radical thing you can do is be happy, because the system doesn't want you to be happy. It wants you to be manageable." In his final years, John Lennon was happy. He was unmanageable. And he was preparing, once again, to speak to the largest audience in the world. Whether that had anything to do with what happened outside the Dakota on December 8, 1980, is a question that classified government documents, a man in a prison cell in New York, and 2,800 pages that were worth 20 years of legal battles to suppress have never fully answered. The archive is open, but some files are still locked. Welcome to Velvet Archives.